Instantly claiming central space, this opens diagonals for the queen and bishop, setting the stage for aggressive development. Opening the center immediately, this mirrors white's ambition and contests the crucial d4 square, preparing for rapid development. Aggressively developing a knight toward the center immediately pressures black's pawn, forcing an engagement. Developing the knight to c6 is a solid, classical response, reinforcing the e5 pawn while preparing for pawn advances. The bishop immediately pins the knight, straining black's central pawn structure and setting up a potential fork later. Challenging the bishop's position, black forces a decision, potentially sacrificing pawn structure for development tempo in this Ruy-Lopez skirmish. Preserving the bishop's diagonal preserves attacking potential against black's d-pawn, maintaining flexibility. Challenging white's bishop, this knight repositions to influence the center and prepare for castling. Securing the king's safety is paramount, opening the door for subsequent piece development and a potential central pawn push. Boldly venturing into enemy territory, black initiates a tactical skirmish, hoping to disrupt white's harmonious development and perhaps exploit an isolated pawn. Probing aggressively, this thrust immediately challenges black's advanced knight and opens lines for your pieces, aiming to disrupt black's development and seize central control. Pushing the b-pawn now, 6. b5 aggressively challenges the bishop and aims to gain central space for black, though it does weaken the queenside pawn structure and potentially creates an outpost for white's knights on c3 or d4 should the bishop retreat to a2. Repositioning the bishop to the more active diagonal enhances white's attacking potential, eyeing the weakened dark squares on black's kingside while keeping an eye on the central tension. Black bravely challenges the center, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure and gain a foothold for their pieces. This bold advance simultaneously opens lines for the c8 bishop while potentially creating a passed pawn later on if white isn't careful. Opening up the d-file with this capture creates immediate central tension and forces black to decide on the fate of the pawn, potentially leading to dynamic exchanges that can either simplify the position or create imbalances for later exploitation. Reclaiming the pawn is secondary, establishing a robust central pawn structure and preparing for rapid development of the kingside is paramount here. The queen elegantly shifts to a square that both defends the pawn on e5 and prepares for future operations on the d-file, a subtle yet vital repositioning for controlling central tensions and opening up lines for other pieces. Solidifying the bishop's influence on the long diagonal, black prepares for kingside castling while keeping the pawn structure intact. Opening the rook to the central d-file prepares to challenge black's pawn on e5 and potentially create pressure along that crucial open line, aiming to exploit the slight disarray in black's development. Bringing the king to safety is paramount, a prudent decision that untangles the development and prepares for the inevitable central struggle. Striking at the center's pawn structure, white aims to shatter black's defensive formation and open lines for his pieces, forcing a tactical recalculation from the defender. The immediate capture of the pawn creates a sharp tactical confrontation, sacrificing some positional integrity for immediate material gain. Black must be acutely aware of white's subsequent attacking potential on the now weakened kingside, where their monarch remains exposed. Reclaiming the pawn on c4 solidifies white's central presence and prepares to challenge the isolated d-pawn. White's bishop, having repositioned from the queenside, now directly confronts black's advanced pawn structure, creating potential threats along the diagonal. This move also subtly hints at future kingside pressure by clearing the way for the rook to potentially join the attack. The immediate consequence is a more compact pawn formation for white, while black's own structure, though seemingly active, now faces renewed scrutiny. Consider how this recaptures opens up lines for white's pieces and constrains black's defensive options. Prioritizing piece development and central control, the queen now ventures out, creating a defensive triangle with the kingside knights and preparing for potential counterplay on the queenside or in the center, while also ensuring the e-pawn isn't left undefended for long. Initiating a powerful knight maneuver, White seeks to exploit the compromised kingside pawn structure and potential weaknesses around black's king. Disrupting white's central pawn structure by capturing the knight fundamentally alters the piece dynamics, creating a more open board for black's bishop and queen while forcing white to reassess their development and potentially exposing their king's pawn shield. Opening up the b-file provides a new avenue for aggressive intentions, potentially targeting black's queenside pawns later, while simultaneously strengthening white's central pawn presence and preparing for a potential kingside pawn storm or central expansion with f4. Unleashing the f-pawn creates immediate central dynamism and seeks to exploit the slight immobility of white's bishop on c4, aiming to gain initiative by disrupting white's pawn structure and potentially opening lines towards the king. The capture on f6 strategically opens the e-file for white's rook, creating immediate pressure along that crucial pathway directly towards black's castled king. This exchange also eliminates black's f6 pawn, a piece that was providing some defensive cover for the king, and simultaneously liberates white's queen to potentially redeploy with greater influence, perhaps towards the kingside attack. While the material is temporarily equalized, the positional advantages created by this capture are what white will aim to exploit. Reclaiming the bishop, black revitalizes the piece, aiming to unblock the central pawns and create attacking potential against white's king. This exchange fundamentally alters the pawn structure and opens avenues for counterplay along the now accessible f-file. Unleashing a bishop to black's f6 knight and the e6 bishop, white seeks to disrupt black's pawn structure and create tactical imbalances, a bold attempt to exploit the slightly compromised pawn cover around the castled king. Shifting the knight to the queen side aggressively challenges the bishop's influence, aiming to disrupt white's coordinated attack by forcing a defensive reaction and creating potential weaknesses around white's king. Capturing the queen with check forces a significant material and positional shift, opening the e-file and potentially exposing the black king's defenses. Reclaiming the queen immediately is paramount. Allowing white's bishop to remain on the dangerous diagonal after the capture would severely compromise your king's safety and surrender a critical outpost for white's pieces. The bishop's capture on d5 immediately opens a crucial diagonal, directly threatening the black king by clearing the way for further pieces to potentially join an attack. Retrieving the attacked queen here, while seemingly instinctive, creates a significant structural weakness on the queen side. The doubled c-pawns, a consequence of the recent exchanges, will now be a long-term target, potentially limiting black's piece mobility and opening up lines for white's rooks. Consider how this pawn structure might influence your ability to develop an effective attack or defend against white's central initiative in the coming turns. Opening the d-file decisively, white seizes a critical open highway for the rook, aiming to penetrate black's position and exploit the recently doubled c-pawns. This creates immediate pressure, forcing black to react and potentially defend passively. Observe how the rook's mobility is now significantly enhanced, potentially threatening lines that were previously blocked. Black gambles for activity by bringing the bishop into the fray, seeking to disrupt white's central pawn structure and create counterplay on the open c-file. However, this energetic but potentially risky bishop sortie leaves the king's defenses slightly porous and demands precise calculation to avoid falling behind in material if white can consolidate. Asserting control over the semi-open c-file is paramount now, aiming to restrict black's piece mobility and prepare for potential incursions into their territory. Reclaiming the central outpost with the bishop, black seeks to untangle their pieces and activate the queenside. This maneuver aims to disrupt white's centralized pawns and create potential counterplay on the b-file, forcing white to address the immediate threats rather than consolidate their material advantage. This capture instantly disrupts black's pawn structure, creating doubled pawns on the c-file and a generally disorganized position for the opponent. Observe how the now isolated c-pawn will require constant defense, potentially limiting black's piece activity. Reinforcing the rook's presence on the open file, black aims to disrupt white's now rather exposed king, creating a dynamic struggle where the initiative is of paramount importance. Unleashing a surprise attack on the queen side, this maneuver aims to disrupt black's carefully constructed pawn structure and potentially create weaknesses around their king. By bringing the rook into the fray, white seeks to activate its piece more effectively than its counterpart on the king side and exploit the open lines that have emerged. This dynamic approach contrasts sharply with the previously more positional struggle, injecting immediate tactical complexity and forcing black to reassess their defensive setup. The tension on the queen side now significantly escalates. Emerging from the shadows of the open file, the rook seizes the vital 7th rank, aiming to disrupt white's queenside setup and penetrate the enemy position. Reclaiming the pawn with the rook, white aims to establish control over the critical 7th rank, creating an immediate threat against black's vulnerable king and forcing a difficult decision regarding piece repositioning. Initiating a powerful central counterattack, this piece repositions to challenge white's overwhelming control of the c-file, aiming to disrupt their rook battery and potentially force concessions. The rook now anchors itself on the 7th rank, a strategic placement that not only exerts pressure along that crucial horizontal, but also prepares for potential deeper incursions into black's territory. This maneuver simultaneously defends the advanced pawn on c7, transforming what was a potential vulnerability into a point of active defense. And importantly, it eyes the vulnerable black king, which currently lacks sufficient pawn cover on its king side. Seeking to consolidate the knight's newly established outpost on the c-file, this maneuver preemptively secures the bishop's escape square, preventing it from becoming a passive piece trapped behind its own pawns. Reactivating the bishop's influence, white repositions it to a more active diagonal, aiming to disrupt black's coordinated pieces and potentially create weaknesses around their king.